Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor, where it's time for my weekend reading report. Yes, it's my weekend reading report. I am here, along with my good friend Roger, to talk about all the stuff that I read last week. Actually, it's all the stuff I read the past couple weeks because I missed a weekend reading report. Sorry. So, what the heck have I been reading the last 2 weeks? Mostly it's been this. This is the Sword and Sorcery Anthology. This was edited by David G. Hartwell and Jacob Wiseman. I read this for February Fantasy Stories. I wasn't going to do anything for February Fantasy Stories, which is a reading event created by the Bookish Bryants and which this year was hosted by Steve Donahue. But I decided to do it, and I decided to read this book, The Sword and Sorcery Anthology, packed full of great stories from a ton of magnificent fantasy authors. And I had a really good time with it. I'm actually glad I picked this up and read it because, yeah, it's really good. This came out in 2012. I bought this used, obviously. This is my battered copy, but you can get this pretty readily, I think. I think this is still available. And I think you can get an ebook of it too if you want that. So yeah, the Sword and Sorcery Anthology, full of great stories. And I had a really good time reading it the last week and a half or whatever it was. Starts off with Robert E. Howard, you know, the father of Sword and Sorcery. So The Tower of the Elephant, a really great Conan story, starts off the collection. Then we've got Black God's Kiss by C.L. Moore, wonderful story. We have The Unholy Grail by Fritz Leiber, which is a Mouser story. Fafford isn't in this one. It's just the Mouser. But it was really good. Michael Moorcock's here with an Elric story, The Caravan of Forgotten Dreams. That one was really good. Carl Edward Wagner's Cain makes an appearance in Undertow, a really good Cain story from Carl Edward Wagner. The Stages of the God by Ramsey Campbell. Bunch of really great stories in here. Most of them were published in other places originally, but there is one original story in this, and that was Michael Shea's Epistle from Lebanon, which was really good. And I don't know if that's been reprinted anyplace else since this, maybe, but it was a good story, and this is a great anthology. So if you're interested in fantasy at all, you probably would like this. And Sword and Sorcery is my favorite subgenre. So, yeah, I enjoy this quite a bit. I was glad I made the choice to read it. So there was that. Then I finally got back to the Edgar Rice Burroughs deep dive. With this book, this is The Lad and the Lion by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This is an interesting book, an early book by Edgar Rice Burroughs. It has the distinction of being the first of his stories that was actually filmed. I think there was like a silent serial or a silent film. And then in the 30s, there was another movie called The Lion Man, I think, that was based on this book. So it has that distinction. Otherwise, it's kind of an unusual Edgar Rice Burroughs book, far from his best. It's far from his best book. It's okay, but it doesn't quite work as a novel, I don't think. It bounces back and forth between two settings. So we have the lad, who is a prince and destined to become a king of a small, unnamed European kingdom. And his father, the king, has a feeling that he's going to be assassinated and that the prince is in danger. So he sends the prince away. And while the prince is gone, yes, the king is assassinated. And then the prince is involved in actually a couple of shipwrecks in this book, and eventually is marooned on the coast of Africa. And he has become friends with a lion who was in a cage on one of the ships that the lad was on. And the lad and the lion become good friends, and they escape into Africa and have all kinds of jungle adventures. But that's one part of the book. In alternating chapters, the novel returns to the small kingdom that the prince has left. And we follow along with all of the various political shenanigans that are going on in this small kingdom. We follow along with the revolutionaries. We've got a new prince, a new king who's just a total creep, and he's awful. And the revolutionaries are awful. And everybody basically in this kingdom, they're all awful, and there are no real heroes back in the kingdom. But we follow along with all of the events going on back in the kingdom. All throughout the book, we alternate chapters between these two places. The adventure story part is actually pretty entertaining. Nothing really original about it, but entertaining. But the way Edgar Rice Burroughs told the story was interesting. And you're wondering all throughout this book, well, okay, are these two stories ever going to tie up? Because they seem kind of completely different, really. But it does, and on the very last chapter, on the very last page, these two stories are brought together, and it's all tied up. It's not exactly successful. He almost pulls it off, but not quite. So it's kind of an oddity. But I'm glad I read it, of course. It's Edgar Rice Burroughs. And I'm glad I read it. It's not his best. It's more of a curiosity, I think, The Lad and the Lion. More curiosity than anything else. I also read... I'll get to that. I also read Astounding Science Fiction from February 1951. So for my Astounding Science Fiction project, I'm reading an issue of Astounding every month from 1951, and then next year I'll be reading an Astounding from 1952 every month, because I have every issue from 51 and 52. And I haven't read any of them. So, yeah, this is actually a really excellent issue. And you could see that cover is just magnificent. That's for the story I Tell You 3 Times by Raymond F. Jones, which is a story I had never read or heard of, I don't think. I don't think I've ever read it. And it was a really good story. And this is a beautiful cover. And the interior illustrations are really interesting as well. So this was a really good issue. It was a better issue than January, I think. It has the title story. It has Assignment in the Unknown by Frank Quattrochi. Has Hideaway by F.L. Wallace. Also has Historical Note by Murray Leinster, which was a good story, but not his best. It's got Franchise by Chris Neville, The Friendly Man by Gordon R. Dixon, and Fair Prey by J.D. Lucy. Now, most of these stories I had never read. I haven't checked to see if any of them had been reprinted anywhere. But, yeah. Excellent stories. There was an article in there which was boring, but not as terrible as the Dianetics article from January. And all the other departments. Of course, we have to have the obligatory Dianetics advertisement on the back, because John W. Campbell just loved Dianetics. So here we go. Dianetics is on the back. But this also has a bunch of really, really interesting illustrations in it. And so, I think a lot of these illustrations in this magazine have probably never been reprinted. But they're all really excellent. And that's part of the fun of reading these old Astounding magazines. Just the artwork is really cool. And the layout of the magazine is interesting. It's just a lot of fun. Look at that. That's awesome. So it was fun. It was a fun experience reading this. I look forward to the next issue, the March issue from 1951. The only other thing I read, because it's been a heck of a couple weeks, man. There's been a lot going on. The only other thing I read was from this. This is the Ant-Man Giant Man Epic Collection Volume 1. And the story I read, I only read one story. I'm going to spend the weekend actually reading this. I'm going to knock this out, because I haven't read enough comic books lately, I'm telling you. But the story I read was actually Tales to Astonish, number 44, and it tells the origin of the Wasp. And it also kind of retcons Ant-Man's, he's still Ant-Man at this point. It retcons Ant-Man's origin and tells the story of Ant-Man and how Henry Pym was married, which we had never heard of at this point. There have been a few Ant-Man stories. We didn't know anything about any wife he had. Anyway, he was married to a woman who was a political refugee, and she is assassinated, and he's really bitter about that, and that inspires him to fight for justice and become Ant-Man. Now, this is totally different from the earlier issues we have already read in this epic collection. Nothing is ever mentioned about a wife, and this is never mentioned as a reason why he becomes Ant-Man. So it was an early retcon to give kind of motivation, I think, for his relationship with the Wasp. So the Wasp, Janet Van Dyne's father, is killed by a monster, this monster, and she teams up with Ant-Man. Ant-Man creates her, he creates her identity as the Wasp. He manipulates her genetics so that she can shrink, and when she shrinks into tiny size, she grows wings and gets antenna. And so she can talk with insects without any fancy helmet like Ant-Man has. And she can fly. And so already she is a more powerful, capable superhero than Ant-Man is because she can fly. And, you know, she's just, right away, she's already better than poor Ant-Man. But Ant-Man needs a partner, he decides, because, you know, he's an inch tall and people are always trying to step on him. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. It's a fun story, but completely ridiculous and full of things that don't make any sense. Now, Stan Lee was like that a lot in some of his early 60s stories. You know, he was just like, you know, I can't really think of anything, so I'm just going to... He was working on these stories so fast, I think. He just came up with goofy ideas and just ran with them. But there are things in this story that just do not make any sense at all. First of all, to defeat the monster, they don't need to be small. They don't need to be Ant-Man and the Wasp. Basically, he figures out a way to put an antidote to the well, not an antidote, but he finds a way to destroy the monster, and he develops a serum that he puts into shotgun shells. And so all he needs to do to destroy this monster is shoot it with a shotgun, which he does. But he does it while he's tiny, which is tremendously difficult. They have to have they decide to become Ant-Man and the Wasp. They have the ants carry the shotgun to this building overlooking where the monster is destroying the city. And the ants have to drag the shotgun up the side of the building because, you know, they're too small to carry it. And then they shoot the shotgun at the monster while the ants are kind of holding the shotgun, and Ant-Man has to pull the trigger, and the trigger's giant. Now, all you really needed to do was stay regular sized, carry the shotgun yourself, take the elevator to the top of the building, shoot the monster's dead. You don't need... And Ant-Man stories are full of stuff like this. Where, like, you know, wouldn't this be easier if you weren't an inch tall? You know? But it was entertaining. It was fun. So I'm going to read the rest of this today and tomorrow. Because it's awesome, even though it's ridiculous. So there's that. That's what I've read. Now, what am I going to read in the future? Well, the next thing I'm going to read is for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club, which is this book. This is The Forgotten Planet by Murray Leinster. As is the case with all the books in Roger's Cheap Old Book Club, this book is in the public domain. You can download it for free if you want to join us in reading along with this book in March. And it looks like a lot of fun. I mean, these guys are fighting giant insects. And so we'll see. I've enjoyed the Murray Leinster books that I've read, and I believe I've read this, but it was a long time ago. And I'm actually wondering if I read the whole thing, because this is basically 3 magazine stories that were put together. And I think I might have only read the portion that was called Mad Planet, which is the beginning portion of this novel. That might be the only thing I've read, and I might have read that on Kindle a few years ago. But we'll see. We'll see. So I'm going to read this. And if you want to join us, join us. It'll be wonderful. And you can talk to other people who are reading it on my Dopey Discord, which I'll try to remember to link down below. So yeah, Forgotten Planet by Murray Leinster, the first book, or excuse me, the next book in Roger's Cheap Old Book Club, the book club pick for March. So that's the next thing I'm going to read. Then, finally, I'm the last person on BookTube to get to this book. This is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. So yeah, I've been wanting to read this forever. I've got the entire trilogy, which A.J. Dunn Reads and Writes sent me the trilogy, very kind. And so finally I'm going to read it because for Steve Donahue's book club, this is Steve Donahue's pick for his book club this month. So hey, good excuse to read it. So Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. It's gotten mixed reviews here on BookTube. Some people love it, some people hate it. It'll be fun to see what I think. So yeah, Wolf Hall. And I will report back to you. Now after that, I had originally planned to read a giant history book for the Historathon, but I'm wavering. I'm having second thoughts. And I'm wondering if I actually will. Because there are other books that I want to read, and I might want to read them more. So I might bail on this Historathon. Maybe. You know what? I'm completely unreliable. Anyway, oh, and the next book on the Edgar Rice Burroughs deep dive is one of the few Edgar Rice Burroughs books that I've never actually read because I never was able to find a physical copy of it when I was reading all the Edgar Rice Burroughs books. Because I was reading Edgar Rice Burroughs back in the days before the internet existed. But now I have an ebook copy of it, and I've had all the Edgar Rice Burroughs books on ebook for a while. All the Edgar Rice Burroughs books as ebooks for a while. And The Girl from Ferris's is the next one. Now this one is kind of a different type of story from Edgar Rice Burroughs. This is him getting serious and telling a serious drama. And I don't know much about it. But it's supposed to be in a more realistic vein. And it was not entirely successful from everything that I've heard about it. I heard it's just kind of like, eh. But I'm doing a deep dive. I have to read it, even though I'm not particularly excited about it, to tell you the truth, because it sounds like the kind of thing that, you know, is not my favorite type of thing. I like his action-adventure stuff. And the book following this is going to be Thuvia, Maid of Mars, which is fantastic. So I'm really looking forward to that. But before I do that, I have to read The Girl from Ferris's. And, you know, it could be fantastic. What do I know? Like I said, I've never read it. So however it is, I'll tell you all about it. So that's that. And I have to do a video on Prisoner of Zenda. I probably will have that up tomorrow. That was the first book, the February book for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club, and it was a winner, let me tell you. So I'm going to be talking about that, I hope tomorrow, if not the next day. And I guess that's all I have to say. I will catch you next time.